On April 22, 2026, near a dirt road east of Lyman, a Russian troop truck carrying more than a dozen soldiers moved past a thin line of trees, thinking the road was still open. At 8:38 a.m., a Ukrainian FPV drone came in low from the rear right side. Seconds later, it struck near the cabin. The explosion tore through the front section, forced the truck to stop, and sent smoke rising over the road. But this was not the end of the attack. Within the next 7 to 9 minutes, at least 3 more FPV drones and a nearby UAV kept watching the area as soldiers tried to scatter toward cover. What looked like one damaged vehicle quickly became several moving targets. This is how modern drone warfare is changing the battlefield. Before we break it down, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more clear battlefield analysis. Before the explosion, the road near Lyman looked almost ordinary. A narrow dirt route cut through low trees, linking several forward positions used for movement, supply, and short pauses between missions. For Russian units in this sector, roads like this were not just paths on a map. They were lifelines. Over the previous 12 days, Ukrainian UAV teams had increased surveillance across the area. Several routes were watched repeatedly, sometimes for 30 to 45 minutes at a time, until normal movement patterns became clear. Small details began to matter. Where trucks slowed down, where soldiers gathered, where communication antennas were placed, and which shelters were used after each movement. Nothing had been struck yet, but the danger was already building. In this phase, the battlefield was not defined by firepower. It was defined by observation. A vehicle could enter the area without hearing anything above it, without seeing a drone, and without knowing that its route had already been marked. This is the shift that changes everything. A truck is no longer at risk only when it reaches an ambush point or crosses into artillery range. In 2026, the risk can begin much earlier. At the moment, a UAV detects movement and keeps watching. Across a zone of nearly 2 kilometers, every pause, turn, and delay can become useful information. And once enough information is collected, the next vehicle that enters the same route is no longer moving through empty ground. It is moving through a watched corridor, where the first visible sign of danger may come far too late. At around 8:29 a.m., the first visible sign of danger appeared on the same road. A smaller support vehicle moved ahead of the main truck, passing between 2 uneven tree lines and slowing near a damaged section of road. It was not the largest target in the area, but it was enough to confirm that the route was active. A Ukrainian FPV drone approached at low altitude, staying close to the ground until the final seconds. Then it detonated near the rear section of the vehicle. The blast was not the main strike of the engagement, but it was strong enough to damage the back end, throw dust across the road, and force nearby soldiers to react immediately. This secondary explosion changed the situation. The vehicle was not completely destroyed, yet the movement around it became far more important than the damage itself. Within seconds, several soldiers moved toward the trees, while others looked for cover near shallow ground positions. A second vehicle slowed briefly, then changed direction. From above, every reaction created new information. The UAV watching the area did not leave. It stayed over the sector, tracking movement across roughly 1.8 kilometers of open and semi-covered ground. What looked like confusion on the road became a pattern from the air. In less than 5 minutes, the route, the likely shelter points, and the direction of retreat were all clearer than before. This is why the first explosion mattered. It was not only a strike, it was a trigger. It forced people and vehicles to reveal where they would go under pressure. And this is where the battlefield began to close in. If a small support vehicle could expose so much with one short blast, then the arrival of a larger troop truck would create an even bigger problem. Before the next stage begins, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more clear and direct battlefield analysis. Because only 6 minutes later, the main vehicle entered the same watched corridor, and this time, the strike would not be secondary. At around 8:36 a.m., the larger Russian troop truck entered the same corridor that had already been watched for several minutes. It moved past the damaged section of road, slowed near a narrow bend, and turned slightly toward a line of trees that seemed to offer cover. But by that point, the route was no longer just a road. It was a marked zone. A Ukrainian FPV drone came in low from the rear right side, using the shape of the ground to stay difficult to notice until the final moment. Seconds later, it struck near the cabin. The main explosion hit the front section of the truck, forcing it to stop almost immediately. Smoke rose from the engine area, debris scattered across the dirt, and the soldiers inside had only moments to make a decision. This was the critical point. Staying inside meant remaining in a damaged vehicle. Getting out meant stepping into open ground under UAV observation. The old battlefield instinct was to leave the vehicle as fast as possible. But here, that instinct created a new danger. Within the next 90 seconds, movement split in several directions. One group ran toward the trees, another moved toward shallow foxholes, and a few soldiers tried to use the truck itself as cover. From above, the situation changed completely. One vehicle had become more than a dozen separate movements. The follow-up did not appear random. At least 4 FPV drones were reported in the area during the next 8 minutes, while the UAV continued tracking from above. Each pause, turn, and attempt to hide created another point of interest. The soldiers were no longer reacting to one explosion. They were caught inside a sequence, and that is what made the strike important. The blast stopped the truck, but the real effect came afterward. Once the men left the vehicle and scattered across the road, the target was no longer only the truck. It became the entire space around it. At around 9:04 a.m., the focus of the drone activity began to widen. The damaged troop truck was still on the road, but the UAV above the sector was no longer watching only the vehicle. It began scanning the area around it. A communication antenna placed near a tree line, a temporary shelter hidden beside a broken wall, shallow foxholes, abandoned equipment, and a small supply point close to the route. These were not major targets in the traditional sense. None of them looked as important as a truck or an armored vehicle. But together, they formed the support network that allowed the frontline position to keep working. A communication antenna was not just metal and wiring. It was the link between soldiers and command. Once that link was disrupted, orders could arrive late, reports could be delayed, and coordination could weaken within minutes. A temporary shelter was not just a place to rest. It protected troops from weather, observation, and sudden pressure from above. A foxhole could be used by 5 to 7 soldiers throughout the day. A small supply cache could keep a position active for 6 to 10 hours. This is why the next stage mattered. In less than 28 minutes, at least 5 support points around the road were identified or checked from the air. Some were close enough to the damaged truck to suggest they had been used recently. Others were connected by footpaths leading away from the route. Each small target added pressure to the larger system. If supplies were lost, movement had to slow. If cover was removed, soldiers had to relocate more often. If communication weakened, reactions became less coordinated. The strike on the truck created the opening. But the pressure on these smaller positions turned one damaged vehicle into a wider problem for the entire local unit. At around 22:37 that night, the same sector entered a different phase. In earlier stages of the war, darkness often gave moving units a narrow chance to reposition, bring supplies forward, or leave exposed ground with less risk. But near Lyman, that advantage was no longer reliable. The reason was thermal imaging combined with constant UAV presence. A cold road could hide tire marks, but it could not fully hide a warm engine. A tree line could block normal vision, but it could not always conceal body heat. Even a shelter used only minutes earlier could stand out if it retained enough warmth against the surrounding ground. This meant that movement after sunset no longer created safety by itself. A vehicle traveling at night could still be detected, followed, and studied until the right moment appeared. In some cases, a small group moving on foot could be noticed from 700 meters to more than 1.2 kilometers, depending on terrain, weather, and equipment. What once looked like a quiet route could still be watched from above. Another layer made the situation more difficult. Some FPV drones were no longer used only as flying strike tools. They could be placed near supply paths, shelter entrances, or narrow road sections, then left waiting until movement appeared. This turned a silent roadside into a possible ambush point. There was no long approach, no clear warning, and very little time to react. At the same time, different drone types created pressure from separate directions. Kamikaze drones were useful against moving vehicles, cabin areas, engine sections, windows, and exposed movement. Bomber drones were better suited for foxholes, temporary shelters, and fixed positions, where a vertical approach could reach places that looked protected from the side. Together, they narrowed every choice. Moving could attract FPV drones. Staying still could expose a position to bomber drones. Waiting for night could still lead to detection by thermal imaging. By the end of that night, the problem was no longer just the damaged truck from the morning. The larger issue was that the battlefield had lost its safe hours. Every movement required more checks, more delays, and more caution. In practical terms, that could slow small unit movement by 25 to 40%, while increasing fatigue across the entire position. And once time itself becomes unsafe, pressure no longer comes only from explosions. It comes from the constant need to decide when to move, where to stop, and whether any route is truly clear. By the morning of April 23, 2026, the road near Lyman no longer looked like a simple movement route. The damaged truck was only one part of the result. Around it, several support points had been exposed. Movement had slowed, and nearby positions had to adjust how they communicated, rested, and moved supplies forward. This is where the wider meaning becomes clear. A single FPV drone may cost around $600 to $1,100, while a military truck, armored vehicle, communication system, or protected shelter network can represent tens of thousands or even millions of dollars in value. That gap changes the logic of the battlefield. A low-cost system can force a much larger and more expensive structure to react. But the financial side is only part of the story. The real pressure comes from repetition. One strike damages a vehicle, another exposes movement, a third forces troops away from cover. Then UAV, thermal imaging, kamikaze drones, and bomber drones keep the pressure active across the same area. Each action may look limited by itself, but together they reduce freedom of movement and make every decision harder. From my personal point of view, the most important lesson is not that drones are powerful on their own. It is that drones become far more effective when they are connected into a system of observation, timing, and follow-up action. That system can turn a short moment on one road into a wider problem for an entire frontline position. And this raises a difficult question. If a unit cannot move safely, cannot rest with confidence, and cannot rely on communication staying stable, how long can it keep operating effectively? What do you think? Are FPV drones and UAV now one of the most important factors in modern warfare? Or are they only one piece of a much larger battlefield picture?